I guess we'll go ahead and get started. Thank you everyone for joining us today. I know it's been a long day with a lot of sessions for you guys, so we do appreciate you coming out and listening to our session this afternoon. My name is Chad Fazio. I'm an SC with F5 Networks, based down in San Diego, part of the Southwest team. I'm an application security specialist and a cloud SME within the organization as well. I've been with the company for about 5 years now. So today we're talking about application security, specifically in a multi-cloud world, right? Now, some of your applications currently might live on-prem. They might live in AWS or Azure or some combination of both. And you've probably run into challenges with how do I secure them, right? How do I ensure policy is consistent across them? How do I ensure that I'm meeting the regulatory requirements that I've got for the applications that I'm trying to run, right? And so before we dive too into that, I'm going to totally change gears here. And I ran into this a while back when I was studying, and I always thought the story was a really good one, so hopefully we find it relevant today. But essentially in World War II, aircraft were a relatively new tool that we had to use, and they were very, very effective at what we were trying to accomplish. But the problem was they were really, really expensive, right? From the standpoint of manufacturing them, from the standpoint of the material that went into them, and the standpoint of training the crews to actually go fly them, right? So midway through the War Department said, okay, we need to find a way to reduce these losses. And they compiled all the damage they'd seen and repaired over the previous 3 years and overlaid it on this composite here. And they said, okay, this is where our planes are being hit. Let's go fortify and armor these sections of the aircraft, and we're gonna reduce our losses. Before I go on, what's everyone's thoughts on that? Sound like a good idea, bad idea? Is that what the data represents? It's a good idea. The planes are being shot there, right? We should patch those holes. In the process of getting approval, this is wartime, everything was very, very restricted. They were forced to send off these plans to a think tank off to the side called the SRG, a Statistical Research Group. And there's an individual in this group named Abraham Wald who looked at this data and he was perplexed. He goes, okay, I mean, the enemies are shooting at our planes. Are they only hitting these very specific sections? Statistically, there should be bullet holes all over this thing, right? Why is it not being hit in certain areas? So he goes back and asks the question, where did this data come from? And they go, oh, these are all the planes that we've repaired. And he goes, so none of the planes that were lost? They go, no, we don't have those planes. Those are in Germany, right? His response back to them was, no, we need to armor the sections of the plane that are not hit in this diagram, right? The pilot, the engines, the control surfaces, those are the things that are required for this plane to get home. Everything demonstrated in this diagram, that's acceptable damage, right? The plane can survive being hit there. We don't need to worry about that as much. That simple thought actually revolutionized the world of aircraft design. The thoughts that he laid out in this analysis still pertain to aircraft design today and how we address the risks that they must face. He also created an entirely new way of thinking about operational analytics that was specifically intended to go look at a specific problem, analyze all the data, and find the best solution for it. Okay, so now why are we talking about this, right? I actually think a lot of what this diagram represents is exactly what we face as security practitioners as well. We know very clearly where a lot of the risk is out there. We know very clearly. But there's also that big unknown, and that's the real risk, right? The risk the targets that aren't shown in this diagram are how Sony got on the news, Marriott, Equifax, right? Those are the breaches we need to worry about. Now, playing right into that, if you look at this, 27% of attacks these days are focused on the network layer, but over 90% of the security spend is focused there. I once again ask why, and the question is, it's the risk we know. We can see it very clearly, we can quantify it. I know I've got a problem at layer 4. On the flip side, you're being attacked at layer 7. 73% of attacks are focused there, but only 10% of the security spend. Now I'd ask, why are they focusing on the application level? And that's because that's where the data really is, right? That's where the juicy stuff is, the credit card information, the social security numbers. No one is trying to compromise your network anymore. There's no value there. The value is in your data. And they're doing a very good job at getting into that data. But the good news is there's already a lot of technology out there to help you with this problem, right? We already have WAFs today. And a WAF does a really good job of solving a lot of the problems that we're faced. They can go look at those OWASP top 10 issues and plug those holes, right? We offer protections against layer 7 that a layer 3 firewall simply can't do by the nature of being a WAF. We can prevent the need for code review, right? So no need to drag your app development team into a security meeting. We can handle that all above and beyond that. And more importantly, we can fix things without needing a code revision, right? If we know that a certain subcomponent, or if your stack is vulnerable to a certain API call, for instance, we can very easily block that with the WAF without having to go re-architect the entire solution. And then finally, we don't have to access your source code. Like, we don't need to, nothing needs to run on the actual application itself. Unlike a RASP environment where you're running things in the runtime environment trying to pick up on exploits, we're doing this all above and beyond the server. But even though that was all good news, the risks are changing out there, right? The attackers are learning, and they're targeting the weakest areas they can find. In this case, we're seeing that 77% of attacks these days are coming from botnets. They're not coming from people anymore. It's not a guy running a script. It's a botnet attacking your entire organization. And 43% of these attacks are no longer matching signatures that we've got in our WAF. So we used to have this robust signature set, right? And there was a limited number of bots out there. It was very easy to say, okay, here's what's coming in, and here's how we block it or filter it. That's becoming less and less the case today. So I would propose the traditional WAF is not as effective as it was, right? So we have this list of things that we know it does really, really well. We know we can get the OWASP top 10 if we need to. We can do SSL and TLS inspection and visibility if we need. And we can do limited protections against scripts that are out there. But I would propose we need something more. Something that I would call an advanced WAF, just like we've got our next generation firewalls, right? It's going to include the basic functionality of a WAF out there today, but it's an add-on these three, and actually one more that I'm going to mention in a minute, additional things that are going to enable us to more effectively compete in the threat landscape of today. So the big ones we're going to add are proactive bot defense, the ability for our WAF to be able to say, are you a human being or are you a non-human entity? And be able to treat and add policy around that. It's a very powerful thing. Credential protection. And we're going to address this from two different levels. But credentials are the most important, or one of the most important things in your environment, right? The ability to identify an individual and the rights and access that they have is very, very important. We need to protect those credentials, and there's some techniques that we've got to do exactly that. And then app layer DDoS. This is a tricky one. Layer 4 DDoS, tuning that can be complex, but it's doable. But understanding at layer 7, am I busy? Or am I being attacked? That's a really difficult thing to do, right? And we need to find a way to break down between those two, and I think I'll show you how we can do that. And then the final one is going to be centralized policy management. So I'm running this security policy in my private data center in San Diego. Now I'm spinning up an Azure instance tomorrow, right? I need to make sure that app has the same level of protections that it had here over there, or else I'm exposed, right? And we're going to talk a little bit more about that as well. So diving right in, we'll do credential protection first. At F5, we have a big thing we believe in, which we call zero trust. Identity of the user really is king, and that defines their access, not where they are on the network. What it used to be is, okay, you're on my network, you're on my trusted zone, you're VPN'd in, I'm going to grant you access to applications based off your proximity or your presence, right? We can no longer do that. Your modern users are out there, they're remote. They're looking at, they're using devices that you frankly don't own or manage anymore. So we lose a lot of control as an organization. So how do we protect that, right? Number one, MFA is a requirement. Like, it's not like a nice to have anymore. You guys have to have MFA on critical applications. It's the only way to protect them. Otherwise, people are going to find ways in. But more importantly, federated access with single sign-on. Having a single point of entry for all your applications, everything internal and external to your organization. Here's where the people come in, and once they're in, we authenticate them out with tokens, SAML, OAuth, whatever you prefer, right? We have a single point to both enable and disable access. Really, really important. But on the WAF side, let's talk about credential stealing for a little bit, right? And there's going to be three real primary ways people steal credentials, and we'll just breeze through this really quickly. They're going to compromise your database and grab everything at once. They're going to have a botnet or a man-in-the-browser attack that specifically grabs someone's credentials, or they're going to phish, or they're going to spear phish, right? They're going to know they're specifically going after your organization, your organizational unit, or you, right? And they're going to find a way to get your credentials. The important thing with these bottom two here is that they're directly getting non-hashed passwords. So it's not like they're going to get assaulted or a password they can't use, right? If a man-in-the-browser attack succeeds, they've got your username, they've got your password. If a phishing attack succeeds, they once again have your full credentials. So as we talk about this, let's walk through what it really is, right? So what's it mean if someone's had their form grabbed, for instance, right? So in this case, we've got an attacker, and he's loaded some type of malware on our victim's PC. This could have been loaded any number of ways. It could have been through a compromised ad network. It could have been through a dirty USB stick. But the point is, this guy's now got some compromised code running inside of his browser. So our friend here goes to what looks to be Salesforce and decides he wants to log in, right? Now, the way this malware works on the victim's PC, it's not grabbing every parameter it sees. It's not looking for every single field that goes through. It's specifically designed, in this case, it wants to look at Salesforce and Salesforce only. So if it sees that FQDN pop through its browser environment, its ears perk up, and it goes, okay, I want to capture your credentials, right? So the user sees a secured site, SSL, locked, everyone's happy, right? Why would I not trust what's happening here? But at the same time we do this, the malware is going to go into the DOM, and it's going to grab the parameters. As you can see here, user ID, password, right? It's going to capture those. The user is going to submit it, get logged in, and is totally happy and fine, right? But at the same time, that malware has sent that off to a drop zone. That drop zone is going to simply compile a list of username and passwords, and at a later time, this attacker is going to replay them, right? He's got a really high likelihood of those being good passwords unless you fat finger things, right? But let's back up just a little bit and go right back here. So user ID, password ID, right? Most websites are going to have a very static representation of this field, right? We're going to capture a username and password parameter. That's what we're going to call it. This makes it really, really easy to script against now, right? An attacker can simply take, sorry, I don't know if you guys can hear me, can take your list of parameters or your usernames and passwords and replay it via script against this. It's going to keep working until either the usernames work or the passwords fail, right? But there's nothing to prevent them from doing so. What if our WAF was smart enough to say, hey, these are sensitive parameters. These are something that every time the page loads dynamically, they should be different. And by different, I don't mean like username 123, password 123. It's going to be a hex string every single time. There might be decoy values as well. Maybe we'll put 4 parameters one page, 5 the next time, 2 the next time, right? It makes it impossible to script against. Now it's more effort than it's worth for that attacker to try and figure out a way to manually run that 1,000 parameters through your website, right? He's going to move on to the next organization that's not doing it. A capability like that is not what a WAF does. A WAF is simply looking at layer 7 ACLs and rules, right, and passing it or blocking it. This is now contextually looking at, hey, this is important data. We need to treat this differently. I would say this is the functionality of an advanced WAF. Let's move forward here. Bot defense. So bots aren't always bad, right? I gave them a bad rap earlier. I said 77% of attacks are bot related, so we should be blocking all the bots out there, right? And it's really not that easy. Do we want our website to be indexed? Like, do we want Google to come by and add us to their search engine? Do we want Alexa to add us to their rankings? There's certain bots that we're going to need to allow through. But that doesn't mean we should give them total and complete unfettered access, right? We should still be able to build policy around them, decide who we want to allow in, and decide how fast we want them to do things. The things that I mentioned earlier with like layer 7 DDoS thresholding, it can be very difficult to tell, am I seeing normal legitimate traffic or am I seeing attack traffic, right? It can be more so complicated when it's a bot doing it 10,000 times a second, right? So being able to identify that's a non-human actor, they're doing things that a human could not do, let's treat them differently, is a very, very powerful thing. And in case I haven't been clear enough with it, bots are going to be the single biggest attack vector you need to worry about in the foreseeable future. I laugh, I talk to my customers a lot, they're very keen on automation, and I want to automate everything, zero-touch data center. Automation is doing wonders for your attackers as well, right? The ability for them to script and automate these attacks is easier than ever before, and it's only going to get easier. So 50% of internet traffic today comes from bots and non-human actors. 30% of that is malicious. 77% of web traffic or attack traffic is coming from these bot networks with a cost of $2.3 billion. That's real money. That's a ton of loss. And it's all coming through very legitimate channels that are impossible to block with a firewall or a traditional WAF today. So centralized policy management. Now we're finally talking the cloud stuff, right? And we're not going to go deep into the DevOps weeds on this one at all. We're going to stay pretty high level. But the securing applications is already tough, right, in your on-prem data center. When we expand it out to public clouds, it only becomes more challenging, right? And one of the key things I see as I talk to organizations is they've got so many different people wearing so many different hats, right? You've got your security team, your compliance team, you've got your DevOps team, your cloud architect. Everyone's got their hands in this umbrella trying to manage this ongoing project. It becomes very, very complicated. When we tack security on top of that, it becomes only more so. What we need to do is treat things as simply as possible. We need to focus on getting a good enough policy out there as opposed to never implementing a policy and being totally exposed, right? So when I see compliance on here, what I like to say is treat all apps the same. Build one policy that you can apply to everything from the ground up. Like, we don't want to have a different policy for every single application you've got. It's unmanageable. You won't be able to sustain it as you grow. Ownership, it's really important to identify who is going to own these security policies and who's going to own them as they grow. I mean, every WAF policy I've ever seen, it's a constantly evolving thing. It's never static. Someone needs to be there paying attention to it. Without that, it's never going to work. And then, no snowflakes. Like, we can't have this, and I already kind of touched on it, but we can't have this notion of multiple policies and different ways of handling every single application. It needs to be standardized from the ground up. It needs to be easy to deploy. It needs to be programmatic to deploy. It can't be something that someone can go fat finger a setting and break something. It needs to be the same way every single time. The way we get to this is we don't allow snowflakes. There's always one application that requires this or requires that, or we have to treat differently. It will kill you in that transition to the cloud, number one. And number two is you try and secure it. You need to nip it in the bud and say, no, we're not doing it this way. So we talked earlier, application DDoS, right? How do I know I'm under attack, or am I busy? And that was a silly question 4 or 5 years ago. But now in this world of auto-scale everything, it's a legitimate question, right? If I've got an auto-scale group up in AWS that will take as much load as I can throw at it, I mean, to the point my credit card gets rejected, that's a problem, right? I need to identify, am I wasting money on resources that aren't actually doing anything? Am I being attacked, or is this flood of people here trying to buy something from me, right? The big challenges from a DDoS perspective, from my perspective, have always been auto-thresholding. The ability to tune exactly that. Is this a normal flux in traffic, or is this abnormal? And then what we're going to call dynamic signatures here. The ability for the WAF itself to say, you know what, I'm seeing traffic that I consider abnormal, that's outside of what I should be seeing. I don't have a signature for it, but I'm going to build one. And once I build that signature, I'm going to share it with my peers and allow everyone to kind of benefit from my misfortune. Those are two really powerful things when it comes to dealing with bots, number one, and DDoS attacks in general, number two. This will be my only really ugly slide, I hope. But as I said, DDoS is really tough, especially at the application level. When we're at layer 4, we know what our vectors are, and we can take pretty good stabs at what kind of TPS and so forth we expect to see, and we can tune it from there. When we're at layer 7, there's a whole bunch of stuff we have to think about. And so when I say we're adding this into an advanced WAF, here are the things that it's considering, right? So first of all, we kind of go from the left, right? 0-day protections. So the ability to, on day 0, right, identify, even though I don't know that you're a bad actor, what you're doing is bad. And so I'm gonna start identifying and describing you based off what you're doing. A really powerful thing. We're gonna call it behavioral analysis here. It could be machine learning, contextual awareness, whatever you want to say. We're essentially going to profile your data over a fairly long, or your application behavior over a fairly long period of time. How many users you typically see. When your users come in, what are they doing? How fast are they transacting? What types of pages do they go to? How long do they linger? All those things, right? We're going to build a baseline user, and then we're going to start to see users that exceed those baselines, and we're going to treat them differently. We can capture them, we can honeypot them, but the ability to say, you know what, this person's doing something that's atypical from the rest, let's watch them more closely, right? Let's see what they're doing. If they really start to offend us, we're going to make a dynamic signature about them, and now we're going to say, okay, we need to actually start blocking and alarming off this traffic. The next one, layer 7, we talked a lot about bot detection. It plays a huge role in application DDoS, simply from the perspective of if someone's going to launch a huge attack against you, it's most likely going to be automated. If you're able to very quickly and discernibly say that's not human traffic and block it, you're eliminating a huge amount of the attack vectors right out of the gate. The things that you kind of need to be able to do this, and you can see them here, decryption, encryption, heavy URL detection, all that fun stuff. it's really the ability to do deep packet inspection on what's going on, to not only say I'm passing traffic, but this is layer 7 traffic, what's the intent of what it's doing, and making a determination. And then the final one, and this goes back a little bit to the old school layer 4 stuff, is just raw stress detection, right? What's actually happening to the guy behind me that I'm supposed to be protecting, right? If I'm looking at all the other metrics and things look fine, but the server's blowing up, something is still getting through, right? And I need to look at that. On the other hand, if all my metrics are blowing up and I'm sending off alarm bells left and right, but the server's totally okay, maybe I need to calibrate what I'm looking at on the other side, right? And so it's a give and take on these two, and they're used to calibrate each other, but there needs to be some level of monitoring what's happening behind me to make sure that I'm not being over enthusiastic in my protections. And wrapping it up. So, I mean, we've talked a lot about some of the security offerings that I think are critical as we look forward to next generation application firewalls and stuff like that. What I'd love the takeaway from this slide to be simply is in the 21st century, everything's a web application, right? People don't worry about TCP anymore. We're not worried about that type of thing. Everything is layer 7 traffic. Everything is HTTP and HTTPS. It's almost all encrypted at this point. You need something that speaks that language to be able to protect against the threats that exist today. And that's exactly what a WAF can do. I think we've showed you that a traditional WAF, while very, very powerful, it's still going to miss the mark on some of these emerging threats out there. And so just like the time came where we said, a firewall's not enough, I need a next-gen firewall. I need something that uses the tool set that I had and lets me build upon it and do things in an intelligent manner. I think we've reached a point with the WAF as well, where simple layer 7 filtering and blocking is not enough, and we need some of the tools that I've described today. So I thank you all, number one, for all your patience. I tried to breeze through this as quick as I could. Any questions on what we've talked about or anything interesting? Hopefully something interesting. Yes?
What about externally hosted applications? You mentioned Salesforce as your example. How do you force a SaaS external application traffic to flow through a WAF?
It's a good question. No, so if it's a true SaaS application, we obviously, that's outside of our domain. What we can still do is protect the user ID. And the main way we do that would be via federating it. So the modern user has so many logins to so many different organizations. Managing password complexity is tough, all those fun things, right? So if we can manage the login at one point and then federate them out via SAML or OAuth, it's a more secure way for us to manage the identities and to give us a way to turn it off. But you're absolutely right, we can't actually apply a WAF to that. So we can't do, like to Salesforce, for instance, they are a customer, but we can't actually put our WAF in front of them. Anything else, guys? Anything you wished we talked about in this time? It was definitely the most interesting session you've been to today, right? All right, well, thank you all for your time. I appreciate it.